At 6:47 on a Tuesday morning in April, three black SUVs pulled up along the curb in front of a narrow yellow duplex on the east side of Dayton, Ohio. A man named Derek Calloway was walking his 7-year-old daughter to the bus stop when he saw them. He stopped on the sidewalk. His daughter stopped beside him, her backpack hanging off one shoulder. Her hand still wrapped around two of his fingers the way she had held his hand since she first learned to walk. The vehicles were clean and deliberate. A woman in a charcoal wool coat stepped out of the lead SUV holding a leather portfolio. Behind her, a second woman stepped out. One Derek recognized immediately, one he had not spoken to in 6 months. She was crying. He did not know yet what was inside the portfolio. He did not know that the woman in the charcoal coat was an attorney named Priya Desai, or that the documents she carried had been prepared over the course of 4 months by a legal team in Columbus. He did not know that the business appraised at $640,000, the business he was about to be handed, had been restructured specifically so that one man could receive it outright, with no lien, no mortgage, and no condition attached beyond his willingness to carry it forward. What he knew was that 6 months ago, he had driven past this woman on a cold October morning and then stopped his truck and turned around. He almost hadn't. And every single thing that was about to happen on this sidewalk, came down to that one reversal. That one moment when a man with $11 in his checking account and a truck payment 26 days overdue decided that someone else's crisis mattered more than his own exhaustion. Don't look away from this one. What happens next is the reason this story exists. Rewind 6 months. Derek Calloway was 34 years old and lived in a rented duplex on the east side of Dayton. The building was pale yellow narrow, with a front porch that tilted 2 inches to the left where the foundation had shifted years ago. The landlord charged $860 a month and never fixed the tilt. Derek paid on time every month because being late on anything, rent, electric, his daughter's school lunch account, produced a specific pressure behind his sternum that he could not afford to carry into a night shift. He worked nights as a janitor at a distribution center off Route 35. The shift ran 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 47,000 square feet of concrete floor, industrial trash cans that smelled of cardboard and machine oil, a wide dust mop he pushed in long deliberate arcs that no one would ever notice or acknowledge. The pay was $14.75 an hour before taxes. After taxes, after the health insurance deduction for his daughter Lily, his bi-weekly check settled at $912. He had calculated this figure so many times it had stopped being a number and become something closer to a physical boundary, the exact circumference of his life. Mornings were Lily's. He drove home in the gray pre-dawn light, parked the truck beside the duplex, and walked inside quietly. He washed his hands twice, once with soap, once with the orange-scented cleaner he kept under the sink because Lily had once told him the warehouse smell made her nose wrinkle, and he had never forgotten it. Then he stood in the hallway outside her bedroom and listened. If she was still sleeping, he sat on the couch with his eyes closed for 45 minutes. Not real sleep. The kind of stillness where your body goes quiet but one part of your mind keeps an ear open, waiting for the sound of small feet on hardwood. At 6:50, Lily's alarm chimed. A melody she had chosen herself, something soft that sounded like wind chimes, and Derek would already be in the kitchen. Cereal poured, milk measured, banana sliced, each piece exactly the same width, because that was how she liked it, and the consistency of a small thing done correctly every morning was its own form of love. "Morning, bug," he would say. She would climb onto the counter stool and eat without talking for the first 3 minutes. She was not a morning person. Derek watched her in the quiet and said nothing, because some silences between a father and daughter hold more warmth than any words either of them could arrange. He walked her to the bus stop at 7:22. Every morning, rain, cold, it did not matter. He stood on the corner until the bus turned and disappeared, then walked back alone. He slept from 8 to 2:15, showered, and was back at the bus stop by 3:04. Afternoons were homework, then dinner, rice and whatever protein was on sale, then a chapter from the library book they were working through together. They were reading a series about a girl who could talk to animals. Lily would fall asleep around 8:30, and Derek would pull the quilt his mother had made up to her chin, stand in the doorway for a moment in the still dark hallway, and then drive back to the warehouse. This was his life. Ordinary, fragile, held together by routine and a quality of devotion that had never once asked to be noticed. He had been doing it alone for 3 years. Lily's mother, Janelle, had left when Lily was 4. There was no dramatic exit. Just a Tuesday morning when Derek came home from his shift and found a 3-sentence note on the kitchen counter beside a house key. He folded it twice and put it in the back of his sock drawer. When Lily asked where Mommy went, Derek told her Mommy had to go somewhere far away to figure something out, and that it wasn't Lily's fault, and that he wasn't going anywhere. He said it in a voice so steady Lily believed him immediately. He had spent 3 years making sure the voice stayed steady. The morning it changed was a Monday in early October. Derek was driving home from the warehouse at 6:14 a.m. when he saw her. A woman standing alone in front of a building on Grafton Avenue, a hand-painted sign above her reading, Rosewood Bakery, in dark green letters. The front window was covered with brown paper from the inside. She was wearing a fleece jacket over pajama pants and she was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. The quiet kind where the tears fall without asking permission and the face stays almost perfectly still. Derek drove past. He drove approximately 40 yards to the intersection, and then he stopped the truck at a green light and sat there. Behind him, no other cars. Ahead of him, the empty road home. In his chest, the particular discomfort of a man who has witnessed something he cannot unfeel. He turned around. He crossed the street and stopped 6 feet from her. Not wanting to crowd her, not able to leave. The morning air was cold enough to see his breath. Her eyes were red. Her voice, when she spoke, was flat and broken at the edges in the way that voices get when a person has been holding something too heavy for too long. Her name was Margaret Osei. She had started Rosewood Bakery in 2006 with $300 and a used stand mixer. 17 years of 5 a.m. shifts. Wholesale accounts built one relationship at a time. A business she had grown entirely alone. She had a son named Kwame, now at Ohio State on a scholarship she had partly funded by never once paying herself more than $32,000 a year. Her baker had quit Saturday morning over a pay dispute she could not resolve. The corporate contract, 412 items due for a Thursday morning pickup, would collapse without someone to execute it. The penalty clause in the contract meant she would owe the client $7,000 in damages. She would lose the bakery. "You bake," she said, after Derek had listened to all of it without moving. "My mother did. I helped her every weekend until I was 17. It was true. His mother Grace had baked for church events, neighborhood cookouts, the annual Dayton food drive, always by feel rather than recipe, and she had taught Derek the same way. How the dough should spring back under his thumb, how the crust of a sourdough should sound hollow when tapped, how brioche dough needed to be handled like something living because in a way it was. "Let me see your kitchen," Derek said. He called his neighbor Mrs. Whitfield, a retired schoolteacher who lived in the other half of the duplex, and asked if Lily could stay with her for a few days. Mrs. Whitfield said of course. Then Derek called his supervisor at the warehouse, a man named Terrell, and told him he needed to use his 3 remaining sick days. He started baking at 7 a.m. Monday. By Tuesday night he had completed the first 160 items. Dinner rolls, sourdough loaves, croissants that required 14 hours because the dough had to be folded and refrigerated in temperature cycles that could not be rushed. Margaret worked beside him but her hands shook. She had been managing early-onset arthritis for 2 years, and the sustained kneading made her wrists seize with pain. Derek watched her from across the steel counter. "Go rest," he said. She started to argue. He took the dough from her hands and kept working. Wednesday morning, his 3 sick days were gone. He stood in the bakery's back hallway with his phone against his ear and listened to Terrell's voice. Administrative, brisk, the voice of a man reading from a policy manual rather than speaking to another human being. One more unexcused absence and Derek would be written up. One more write-up after that and he was terminated. The job paid $14.75 an hour. His daughter's health insurance ran through that job. His rent depended on that job. His truck payment, already 26 days overdue, depended on that job. Through the doorway he could see the steel counter, the remaining dough rising in covered bowls, the sheet pans stacked against the wall. 241 items left. Margaret was sitting on a stool in the corner with her wrists pressed against a cold towel, her eyes closed. He thought about Lily sleeping on Mrs. Whitfield's pull-out couch. He thought about the thin mattress, the way Lily always tucked her hands under her chin when she slept, the way her alarm sounded like wind chimes. He thought about the note Janelle had left on the counter. 3 sentences. He thought about the voice he had used when Lily asked where Mommy went. Steady, certain, unshakable. He thought about all the mornings he had cut a banana into equal slices and said nothing and meant everything. He thought about Margaret's face on the sidewalk Monday morning. The particular exhaustion of a person standing alone with something too heavy to carry. He exhaled, a long, slow breath that sounded like a door closing inside him. Then he straightened his back. "Terrell," he said. "I understand." He hung up and walked back into the kitchen. He had just sacrificed his job. Not accidentally. Not carelessly. He had stood in a hallway with every financial consequence laid out before him like a map of a place he did not want to go. And he had looked at the map, and he had chosen the kitchen anyway. That decision, that precise, deliberate, devastating choice, was not made out of recklessness or naivety. It was made by a man who had calculated exactly what it would cost him, had felt the full weight of the number, and had decided that the woman sitting in the corner with her wrists on a cold towel needed him to stay more than his checking account needed him to leave. A woman named Carol, who ran the laundromat next door, brought them coffee at midnight. She stood in the doorway and watched Derek pull golden brioche from the oven with bare hands wrapped in damp towels, his gray t-shirt dark at the collar, his knuckles cracked and white with dried flour. She set the coffee on the counter and didn't speak. But she watched, and she remembered. At 2 a.m., Lily's photograph fell from Derek's jacket pocket when he reached for a towel. He picked it up off the flour-dusted floor, looked at it for a long moment, and tucked it back into the pocket closest to his chest. He kept baking. At 4:17 a.m. Thursday, with the last tray cooling on the steel rack behind him, Derek stood in the bakery doorway. 412 items. For nights. His hands were trembling. His eyes would not focus properly on anything farther than 6 feet away. Margaret found him there and stood beside him in the still dark kitchen, and neither of them said anything for a long time. "You can take $400, she said finally. "Please." He closed her fingers around the bills. "You need it more," he said. He drove home in the gray morning light, parked crooked, and sat in the truck for 8 minutes because his legs had temporarily forgotten their purpose. Then he walked inside, washed his hands twice, and stood in the hallway outside Lily's bedroom and listened to her breathe. Friday morning the call came. Terrell's voice was neutral and administrative, the vocal equivalent of a form letter, precise and impersonal in a way that carried its own particular cruelty, because that neutrality meant the decision had already been finalized before the phone rang, that Derek's name had already been removed from the schedule in the distribution center system, that this phone call was not a conversation but a notification wearing the costume of one. Terminated, effective immediately. Final check by mail. Derek sat on the edge of his bed with the phone in his lap after the call ended. The bedroom was quiet. A thin band of gray morning light fell through the curtain gap and crossed his hands where they rested on his knees, the same hands that had cracked and bled across 4 nights of labor in a bakery that wasn't his, for a woman he had met on a sidewalk, for a reason he still could not fully articulate except that she had been standing alone with something too large to carry, and he had known exactly what that felt like from the inside. He thought about the numbers. The checking account, $11. The truck payment, now 33 days overdue. The electric bill due today unpaid. Lily's school lunch account, a balance of $4.30, which meant approximately 2 days before she would come home carrying the quiet shame of the child who had to accept a courtesy tray from the cafeteria line. The rent, $860, due in 9 days. The total deficit, when he wrote it on a legal pad that night, came to negative $1,287. He stared at the number for a long time. He thought about leaving. Not Lily, never Lily, but the effort itself, the daily machinery of maintaining dignity on the edge of collapse, the exhausting and invisible performance of stability that a single father conducts every day so that his daughter can believe the ground beneath her is solid. He thought about what it would feel like to simply stop calculating, to release his grip on a life that seemed specifically designed to punish him for holding on. The thought lasted exactly as long as it took him to hear Lily's wind chime alarm go off down the hall. He stood up. He walked to the kitchen. He sliced the banana. Each piece exactly the same width. The eviction notice arrived 9 days later, taped to the front door on a Tuesday afternoon when Lily came home from school. Derek saw her on the porch, her backpack on one shoulder, her face turned up toward the paper with the careful expression she wore when she encountered a word she didn't understand. He took the letter off the door before she finished reading it. "What's that?" she asked. "Just mail," he said, and held the door open for her. That night, after Lily was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down all the numbers again, as if looking at them a second time might change what they added up to. Did not. The house was cold. He had set the thermostat to 58 to reduce the next bill, and the kitchen was so quiet he could hear the clock above the stove, each tick falling into the silence like a stone dropped into still water, measuring the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. He found work the following week. A split shift at a gas station 2 miles from the duplex, and a weekend position doing oil changes at a shop run by a man from his church. Neither paid well. Together they covered the immediate emergencies. The eviction notice settled, the electric bill brought current, but the truck payment could not be saved. The lender sent a final notice. Derek read it, folded it precisely, and put it in the drawer with Janelle's note. On a cold morning in November, while Lily was at school, the tow truck came and took the truck away. Derek stood on the porch and watched it go without saying anything. His hands were in his jacket pockets. His face was still. He watched until the truck turned the corner and disappeared, and then he went inside and looked up the bus schedule for Route 7. Lily knew something was wrong before he told her anything. She was 7 years old and she had been watching her father's face for 3 years with the particular attention of a child, who understands that a parent's expression is the most important weather report available, the primary instrument by which she navigated the emotional climate of their home. She did not ask about the truck. She did not ask why they were taking the bus now. She did not ask why the thermostat was set lower than usual, or why dinner had been rice 3 nights in a row. One evening in November after dinner, she climbed onto the couch beside him while he sat looking at nothing in particular, the legal pad on the cushion beside him, the numbers staring up at both of them. She did not speak. She put her hand on top of his, her small fingers resting across his cracked knuckles, and she left it there. She did not look at him. She looked at the wall in the same direction he was looking, as if she were simply keeping him company in whatever place he had gone inside himself. They sat like that for perhaps 4 minutes. Then she slid off the couch, said good night, and went to her room. Derek looked at his hand where her fingers had been. He did not sleep that night. 4 miles away, Carol locked up the laundromat at 9 p.m. and sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time. She had watched Derek work through the bakery window for 4 nights. She had carried coffee across the street at midnight and seen a man pouring himself into labor that would pay him nothing for a stranger, while his own life eroded silently behind him. She had watched Margaret count the completed items Thursday morning. She had heard, through the thin wall between the buildings, the phone call from Terrell, or rather she had heard Derek's voice afterward, that single quiet exhale, the sound of a door closing. Carol knew something that neither Derek nor Margaret knew she knew. She had grown up with Margaret. She knew the history of Rosewood Bakery from its first day. And she knew that Margaret had spent the past 3 months meeting quietly with a business attorney named Priya Desai about a restructuring plan that Margaret had not told anyone about yet. A plan that was still missing one essential element. Person. Carol picked up her phone and called Margaret. "I know who your person is," she said. The Tuesday morning in April was gray and ordinary. The kind of Ohio spring morning where the sky looks like wet cement and the air smells like thawing earth and the world feels temporarily suspended between what it was and what it is about to become. Derek was walking Lily to the bus stop, her hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers, her backpack bouncing lightly with each step, when he saw the 3 black SUVs parked along the curb in front of the duplex. He slowed. Lily slowed beside him. He recognized Margaret immediately. The charcoal wool coat, the careful posture of a woman who had built everything she owned through sheer structural discipline. Beside her stood a woman Derek did not recognize, trim and composed in a dark navy jacket, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Margaret's face, when she turned and saw him, collapsed and rebuilt itself in the same instant. The tears came before she spoke. She did not try to stop them. Derek stopped walking 6 feet from her, his hand still holding Lily's. His posture carried the careful geometry of a man receiving more information than he knows how to immediately process. Shoulders level, chin straight, eyes moving between Margaret and the stranger and the portfolio and the SUVs, assembling pieces without yet knowing what they formed. "Derek," Margaret said. "Margaret." His voice was quiet. Even. "You okay?" She made a sound that was half laugh and half something that had no name. Then she straightened. She turned to the woman in the navy jacket. "This is Priya Desai," Margaret said. "She's my attorney." Priya nodded. She did not open the portfolio yet. She understood that this moment belonged to Margaret first. Margaret stepped forward. She was close enough now that Derek could see the specific quality of her tears. Not grief, not relief, but the kind of crying that happens when gratitude becomes too large to remain inside a person's body and simply finds its own exit. She put both hands on his arms, the same arms that had worked in her kitchen for 4 straight nights, and she looked up at him with a steadiness that had clearly cost her significant effort to maintain. "6 months ago you walked into my kitchen when you had every reason to keep driving," she said. "You lost your job. You gave 4 nights of your life to a woman you didn't know. You refused the only thing I could offer you." He paused. She breathed. "I have spent 6 months figuring out how to make that mean something." She nodded to Priya. The attorney opened the portfolio and removed a stack of documents. Legal-sized, heavy paper, tabbed with yellow flags, the top page bearing the official seal of the state of Ohio and, below it, the words "Transfer of Business Ownership" in clean black type. "I've been working with Priya to restructure the business," Margaret continued, her voice finding its steadiness again, word by deliberate word. "The bakery, the building, the equipment, the wholesale accounts, and the corporate contracts, including the one you saved, are being transferred to you. Full title. No lien. No mortgage. No conditions." Derek did not move. The street was quiet. A bird landed on the power line above them and then lifted off again, as if the air itself had shifted. Mrs. Whitfield had appeared on the duplex porch in her bathrobe, drawn outside by the SUVs, and she stood with one hand pressed flat against her chest. Carol stood on the laundromat steps across the street, her arms folded, watching. "The appraised value," Priya said, "is $640,000. She turned to the first flagged page. "There is also a 12-month operating fund of $48,000, deposited to a new business account in your name. And health coverage, effective the 1st of next month, for you and your daughter." Lily, who had been standing beside her father with her hand still wrapped around 2 of his fingers, looked up. "Daddy," she said, "what does that mean?" Derek did not answer immediately. He was looking at Margaret. His face was doing something it almost never did. The careful stillness was fracturing slowly, the way ice cracks in spring from the center outward, and what was underneath the stillness was not what most people would expect from a man who had just been handed a business worth $640,000. It was not triumph, not excitement, not the loud, uncomplicated joy of a man who has won something. It was disbelief. Quiet, overwhelmed, undefended disbelief. "I don't," he started. "You do," Margaret said. "You already proved it." He looked down at his daughter. He knelt on the sidewalk, on the cold, cracked concrete in front of his rented duplex, in front of Margaret and the attorney and Mrs. Whitfield and Carol and the 3 black SUVs. And he put his hands on Lily's shoulders and looked at her face, and for the first time in 3 years, he let his eyes fill with tears he did not try to stop or redirect or quietly blink away. "It means," he said, "that we're going to be okay, Bug." Lily studied his face for a moment with the careful attention she gave to all important things. Then she nodded once, as if this confirmed something she had already decided to believe. Margaret crouched beside them both. She put one hand on Derek's shoulder. Her voice, when she finally delivered the words she had been carrying for 6 months, was low and certain and entirely without performance. "The world doesn't always see what you give away in the dark," she said. "But it keeps the record." Mrs. Whitfield pressed her hand harder against her chest. Carol unfolded her arms and wiped her face with the back of her wrist. Priya Desai looked down at her portfolio. The street was still and gray and cold, and the morning was ordinary in every external way. And something completely extraordinary had just happened on a cracked sidewalk in Dayton, Ohio, witnessed by exactly the right people. 6 months after that Tuesday morning in April, Rosewood Bakery was open 7 days a week. Derek arrived at 4 a.m. every day, the same hour he used to clock into the warehouse, except now the building smelled like sourdough and warm butter instead of machine oil and cardboard. He had hired 2 bakers and a part-time counterperson. The corporate contract had expanded into 2 additional accounts. Monthly revenue averaged $23,000, and for the first time in Derek's adult life, he had a savings account with a balance he did not need to memorize because it was no longer an emergency number. It was a foundation. Lily had her own stool in the bakery kitchen, a tall wooden one Margaret had given her on the first week, and on Saturday morning she sat on it and watched her father work, her chin resting on both hands, her feet swinging above the tile floor. She helped when she wanted to, pressing cookie cutters into rolled dough, counting dinner rolls as they came out of the oven, calling out the numbers in a voice that was small and precise and entirely serious about the task. Margaret came in on Tuesdays, not to work, to sit at the corner table with a cup of coffee and watch what her bakery had grown into. The way a person watches something they loved become something even larger than the love they gave it. On a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year after Derek had first turned his truck around on Grafton Avenue, Lily looked up from her stool and asked him a question. "Daddy," she said, "why did you help her? You didn't even know her." Derek pulled a tray of sourdough from the oven. He set it on the cooling rack. He turned to face his daughter, 7 years old, now 8. Her face open and waiting and entirely certain he would have an answer worth hearing. His hands were dusted with flour, the same hands that had cracked and bled in this kitchen a year ago, the same hands that had cut bananas into equal slices every morning for 3 years, the same hands that had held the eviction notice and the legal pad and the photograph of his daughter on a flour-dusted floor at 2 in the morning. He looked at her for a long moment. "Because she was standing alone with something too heavy to carry," he said. "And I knew what that felt like. That's the whole thing, Bug. That's all of it." Lily nodded slowly, the way she nodded when something moved from the category of information into the category of understanding. She picked up a cookie cutter shaped like a star. She pressed it into the dough. Margaret, at the corner table, had heard every word. She looked down at her coffee cup. She did not speak. Some things are too complete to require a response. Stay with this story until the very last frame, because what you just watched is not a fantasy about luck or timing or being in the right place. It is a precise and documented account of what happens when a man with nothing to spare gives anyway, when a father running on empty chooses to see someone else's crisis before his own, when the arithmetic of generosity works itself out across 6 months and 3 black SUVs and a leather portfolio on a cold sidewalk in April. Derek Calloway did not know he was building anything when he turned his truck around that Monday morning. He thought he was baking bread. He thought he was helping a stranger survive a week. He had no idea he was also writing the next chapter of his daughter's life. The chapter where the stool in the kitchen is hers, and the mortgage is paid, and the alarm still sounds like wind chimes, and the banana is still sliced into equal pieces, and the voice that said "I'm not going anywhere" turned out to be telling the absolute truth.